The morning of April 24, 2013, dawned like any other in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Thousands of garment workers made their way to work at Rana Plaza. None knew this day would become a symbol of tragedy. Just before 9 a.m., disaster struck. The building collapsed, trapping thousands inside. The world watched in horror. The Rana Plaza tragedy claimed over 1,000 lives. It forced the world to confront the true cost of cheap clothing. The victims of Rana Plaza were more than just numbers. They were mothers, fathers, daughters, and sons. They were the human faces of a global industry that often prioritizes profit over people. Their stories reveal the raw human cost of our insatiable appetite for fast fashion. Imagine being a young woman named Sheila, working long hours in a dimly lit factory. But that dream turns to dust as the building around you crumbles. Their stories are a painful reminder of the human cost of our choices. The warning signs were there, impossible to miss. Deep cracks had appeared in the building's walls the day before the collapse. Workers, fearing for their safety, had voiced their concerns, but their pleas were ignored. They were ordered back into the factory, their fears dismissed in the relentless pursuit of production targets and deadlines. This disregard for human life is a chilling indictment of a system that prioritizes profit over people. The garment industry, fueled by our insatiable demand for cheap clothing, operates on razor-thin margins, often cutting corners on safety to maximize profits. This pressure trickles down to factory owners, who are often caught between the demands of global brands and the safety of their workers. The collapse of Rana Plaza was not an isolated incident. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. It exposed the systemic failures, the lack of oversight, and the culture of impunity that allowed such a disaster to occur. It was a stark reminder that behind the glossy facades of fast fashion lie the hidden stories of exploitation, neglect, and disregard for human life. The Rana Plaza tragedy sent shockwaves around the world. The images of the collapsed building, the desperate rescue efforts, and the sheer scale of the loss of life sparked outrage and demands for justice. No longer could the fashion industry hide behind a veil of ignorance. The true cost of cheap clothing was laid bare for all to see. Consumers, often unaware of the human cost behind their purchases, were horrified by what they learned. The tragedy sparked a global conversation about ethical fashion, about the responsibility of brands to ensure the safety and well-being of the workers who make their clothes. It was a wake-up call, a moment of reckoning for an industry built on a foundation of exploitation. The Rana Plaza disaster became a turning point, a catalyst for change in an industry notorious for its resistance to reform. It forced brands to confront their complicity in a system that perpetuates unsafe working conditions and worker exploitation. It ignited a movement demanding transparency, accountability, and a fundamental shift in the way we produce and consume fashion. Fashion's hidden shame. The Rana Plaza tragedy exposed the dark underbelly of the global fashion industry, a multi-billion-dollar industry built on the backs of low-wage workers, often women and girls, in developing countries. These workers toil long hours in unsafe conditions, earning poverty wages to feed the insatiable appetite of Western consumers for cheap, trendy clothing. The fast fashion model, with its relentless cycle of new trends and disposable clothing, has exacerbated these problems. The pressure to produce more, faster, and cheaper has led to a race to the bottom, with brands seeking out the lowest production costs, often at the expense of worker safety and well-being. The Rana Plaza collapse shone a light on the human cost of this model, the lives shattered and the families torn apart in the pursuit of profit. It forced us to confront the uncomfortable truth that our insatiable desire for cheap clothing comes at a high price, a price paid for in human suffering. Demands for justice. In the aftermath of the tragedy, there were calls for justice, for those responsible for the deaths of so many innocent people to be held accountable. The owner of the building, Sohail Rana, a powerful figure with political connections, was arrested and charged with murder, along with several others. But the blame extended far beyond a single individual. International brands that sourced their clothing from the factories housed in Rana Plaza faced intense scrutiny. They were accused of turning a blind eye to the dangerous working conditions in their supply chains, prioritizing profits over the safety of the workers who made their clothes. The Rana Plaza disaster sparked a global movement demanding greater transparency and accountability in the garment industry. Consumers, armed with the knowledge of where their clothes were made and under what conditions, began to demand better from the brands they supported. The Accord, a step towards safety. Out of the ashes of Rana Plaza, a glimmer of hope emerged. The tragedy served as a catalyst for the creation of the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh, a legally binding agreement between global brands, trade unions, and NGOs. The Accord, a groundbreaking initiative, aimed to address the systemic safety issues that plague the Bangladeshi garment industry. Under the Accord, signatory brands committed to independent factory inspections, worker training programs, and the establishment of a system for workers to report safety concerns without fear of reprisal. It was a significant step toward creating a safer and more sustainable garment industry in Bangladesh. The Accord, while not without its limitations, demonstrated that change was possible, that brands could be held accountable for the conditions under which their clothes were made. It was a testament to the power of collective action, of consumers, workers, and activists coming together to demand better from the fashion industry. The struggle for compensation. While the Accord focused on preventing future tragedies, the Rana Plaza arrangement was established to provide compensation to the survivors and the families of those who lost their lives in the collapse. The arrangement, a complex process involving brands, governments, and NGOs, aimed to ensure that the victims and their families received the financial support they desperately needed. The process of securing compensation was long and arduous, marked by delays, disputes, and resistance from some brands. It took years of campaigning and pressure from labor rights groups, consumers, and the international community to ensure that all those affected by the tragedy received fair compensation. The Rana Plaza arrangement, despite its challenges, represented a significant victory for the victims and their families. It sent a clear message that the lives of garment workers mattered, that they deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, and that their sacrifices should not be forgotten. Rana Plaza's legacy, a turning point. The Rana Plaza tragedy, a dark chapter in the history of the garment industry, also marked a turning point. It brought the issue of ethical fashion to the forefront of public consciousness, forcing consumers, brands, and governments to confront the human cost of cheap clothing. The tragedy sparked a global movement for greater transparency and accountability in the fashion industry. Consumers became more aware of the conditions under which their clothes were made and began to demand better from the brands they supported. Brands, under increasing pressure from consumers and investors, started to implement more sustainable and ethical practices. The Rana Plaza disaster served as a stark reminder that the pursuit of profit should never come at the expense of human life. It highlighted the urgent need for a more ethical and sustainable fashion industry, one that values people and the planet over profit. Choosing a different path. Ethical fashion. The Rana Plaza tragedy left an indelible mark on the world, but it also ignited a movement for change. Consumers, awakened to the realities of the fast fashion industry, began to seek out ethical alternatives, supporting brands that prioritize fair labor practices, safe working conditions, and environmental sustainability. The rise of ethical fashion is a testament to the power of consumer choice. By choosing to buy from brands that align with our values, we can support a more just and sustainable fashion industry. We can choose to invest in quality over quantity, opting for timeless pieces that will last longer and reduce our environmental impact. There are many ways to embrace ethical fashion. We can support brands that are transparent about their supply chains, that use sustainable materials, and that pay their workers a living wage. We can also choose to buy less, to repair and upcycle our clothes, and to support the growing market for second-hand and vintage clothing. The Rana Plaza tragedy must never be forgotten. It stands as a stark reminder of the human cost of fast fashion, of the lives lost and the families shattered in the pursuit of cheap clothing. It is a call to action, a reminder that we all have a role to play in creating a more just and sustainable fashion industry. Let us honor the memory of those who lost their lives in Rana Plaza by demanding better from the brands we support. Let us choose to use our voices and our wallets to support a fashion industry that values people and the planet over profit. Let us never forget the lessons of Rana Plaza, and let us continue to fight for a world where such tragedies never happen again.
If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our channel for more updates.